Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to cover topic number 25, which says make API methods scope user role agnostic. So that same API can be tested with different auth roles and scopes. To give an example, for example, if I open this project and if I go to this test, assert that a user can update an existing booking. At this moment, if I go to this booking, what we will see is that, for example, this booking is using a spec-based spec.get with a valid authentication token. So if I go here, it is accepting its string token, and the token that we are providing is a valid authentication token. And that is also the reason why I added this to-do task to mention that this method is tied to a specific auth token, user type, scope type. For your test to be flexible, your method should be auth agnostic. So refactor this method or class later. And what I meant from this was, at this moment, I can only test this update booking with valid authentication tokens. But what if I want to test it with a scenario where I'm not providing valid tokens and I expect, let's say, an unauthorized 401 message, or let's say 403 forbidden message. At this moment, there is no way I can write such kind of test. So what I need to do is I need to make my APIs scope agnostic. So first and foremost, I have to talk something about scope. What is scope, right? So if I open internet and if we search for scopes in API, so for example, if we go to, let's go to page number 2, for example, auth 2.0 scopes, what we see is, let me zoom in a little bit. You can go through this website and it specifies that scope is a mechanism in auth to limit an application's access to a user's account. And then it also mentions that auth does not define any particular values for scopes, since it is highly dependent on the service's internal architecture and needs. And to give an example, let's say if we open different applications, so for example for Slack, we will see that the value of scopes would be something like admin apps read, admin barriers read, it's like read, write, manage, join. So it's a very different syntax what is being provided here, right? Invite, mark, etc., etc. And if you look into GitHub, the scopes that we will see is more like repo status, repo invite. So there is no typical standard that you can use, and as it specifies, it really depends on the application's internal architecture and needs, and everyone can define their own scopes. So what we will do is we will go back to the project, and let's define a scope entity for our own use case. So what you've seen is, in RESTful Booker, we have two cases. We have get and post, which does not need any authentication tokens. And we have cases like update, partial update, and delete, which needs authentication tokens, right? So we actually only have two use cases: a guest user, which can get and create bookings, and an admin user, which can actually update, delete, and also do other operations. But just to get a little bit of variety, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create three different user rules. I'm going to create a guest user, and I'm going to create a maintainer, maintenance user, and I'm going to create an admin user. And theoretically, a guest user should only be able to get bookings. A maintenance user should be able to actually get, create, and update, and an admin user should be able to do all three of them. But of course, in our project, we only have two rules, but this is just for variety purposes. So if I go to Windows 2, let's make a copy of this test environment class. So I'm going to copy this class, and the place where we can add scope is, scopes are very close to authentications. So let's go ahead and add this, paste this class here, and I'm going to call it as scope. And in scope, we will have three different kind of users. So for example, a guest user, maybe a maintainer, and a admin. And maybe we can say a guest user can read, a maintainer can basically do read and write, and a administrator can also do delete. Rest everything else is good. And instead of making this class as auth tokens, because now it also talks about scopes, let me rename this package to auth, because then we can have auth and scope in the same class, right? So with the scope defined, now what we need to do is, if I go back to booking API class, we need a mechanism using which we can get the scope information, and based on the scope information, if we can build the right specification based on whatever scope is provided. Because at this moment, if you look into base spec, we have two methods. One will give us a request specification without authentication headers, and another one that will give us request specification with authentication headers. So actually what we need is a specification factory that can give us the right specification that we can use inside the API classes based on the scope that the user is providing. So in the base spec package, actually we can create a new class, and I can call this class as a spec factory, right? And what we want to do in this particular class is we want to have a method which can give us the right request specification based on the scope that is being provided. So let's say if I create a method called public static, and what you want to do is we want to give a request spec builder, and we are saying get spec for, and we're going to specify a scope. So we're saying for a scope that is being requested, give us the right request specification for the scope. And the way we can do it is we can write a switch statement, and we can use this particular scope, and then we can say for case admin, or maybe first for case guest, we want to say return, and what you want to do is we want to return this particular specification, right? So base spec dot get. So we want to return base spec dot get without authentication tokens. And then we want to have a case for maintainer where we want to say return. And at this moment, because we know that we don't really have a different role called maintainer, so I will actually provide the same thing which I will use for administrator. And for administrator, actually what we know is let me go back to the booking API. Let's call this with the auth API get token method. So let's call it with a valid token for now, and in the future we will go and refactor this as well. Then let's create a case, let's say admin, and we will do exactly the same thing, that for admin we will provide a right admin token, right? And the last case could be default, not do but default, and here we can actually throw an exception, throw new illegal state exception, where we can say not a valid scope, pick a scope from, and then we can just go to this class and we can say take all the values, and actually we have to provide the toString method, and now we are good, right? And what it is complaining is it is actually saying merge with the case maintainer. So let's do that. We will remove this line. So for both maintainer and admin, we have exactly the same line, right? So now we have a mechanism also for getting the right specification depending on the role. So let's go ahead and update our API to use this spec factory to get us the right specification. Now before we have a nice clean way of doing it, let's make an ugly implementation, right? So what I will do is I will just go ahead and introduce the scope variable here. And again, I'm saying it, this is not a nice way of implementing this, but at this moment I'm just trying to show to first make it work, and then we will try to make it better. And instead of now using base spec get, actually what we can do is we can use a spec factory, and in the spec factory we can say get spec for scope, and for this scope again we need to first build this, otherwise we don't have the right specification. And now the update booking is complaining that hey, now it expects 3 variables, so we also need to provide a scope variable, scope input, and that could be for scope admin. To make it more readable, we will do static imports for our scopes because they are like self-explanatory. So import static, and at this moment I've changed nothing, so this test should work exactly as it was working before. So let's run it. Okay, so the test is working fine. But the only difference is now actually if I want to test the same API endpoint for an invalid scope type, then we will also be able to test it. To give an example, let's say if I create a new nested class, I call it as nested, and if I say class, then I can say guest user, and in the guest user, let's say if I copy paste this update user method, and let me come here, and now instead of admin, if I pass this as guest, then it should not be SC. Okay, so I can remove these two lines, and let's see if this test fails or not. So ideally it should be a unauthorized error like 401, but since RESTful Booker has got some bugs, it might as well be a 403. So let's see which one is this. Let's come down. So it was a 403 error, right? So if you change this message to, let's say, 403 forbidden, then this test should pass, and we can see that we are able to now test the same API endpoint for different user roles and different scopes. So this is good. Cool. So this is working fine now. Aside that a user cannot update an existing booking without valid authentication, right? So now we are able to also create tests for guest users. That said, this is not a very clean implementation because, well, from a clean code perspective, now we have too many parameters, and also it does not make sense to pass this information like this. So what we will do is, instead of keeping our API classes methods as all static methods, we are going to make our APIs scope aware, right? Because scope is something that an API should be aware of. And let me make a copy of this class. So if I make a copy of this class, let's add it here, paste, and let's call it as booking API, for example, now refactored. And then of course we'll only have one implementation, but instead of trying to change the existing API, I first want to give a comparison to show a different implementation. So booking API refactored, cancel, and in this API refactored class, I'm going to basically remove all these methods as being static. So we will keep them as non-static methods. So let's remove this static methods. So now we have all non-static methods, and what I want to do is I want to make our APIs scope aware. So let's first create a constructor. So we can keep the constructor as private, booking API refactored, and what you want to do is we want to use a scope information, and once we get this scope information, we also want to have a scope field here. So let's say private scope field, and this dot scope equals to scope, right? So whenever we call this particular API, we want to basically set this particular scope field variable. We can have a static method, so we can say public static, and we can return the same object, and we can say use as, and then we can take scope, and in here we can actually create a new instance of booking API refactored, which accepts this particular scope value. So this method will become our entry point to get the instance of the object, and from that moment onwards we will be able to make a call to any particular method. And let's also change all these methods as we have as we have done it for update booking. So and in fact now we don't need to provide the scope information inside the method. So let's remove the scope input, and then you can see the scope is coming from the class. So if I copy this, spec factory get spec for scope.build, let's put it everywhere, the same thing, and I'll everywhere, and let's also change it in the get booking, and you can see now it's more consistent, right? We don't need to have different methods here. We have exactly the same methods here, because now the factory will give us the right specification, so we don't have to worry about deciding which is the right specification in the API class. And let me do a Control Alt L. This formats the whole class. So yeah, with this I think I can also remove this to do calls, because now our methods are not tightly coupled to any particular auth tokens. So let's remove this. Let's go up. Yeah. So I think this is looking correct. So if I go to booking test class, then the guest user, instead of calling the booking API, what I can do is I can call booking API refactored, and then I can say use this as guest. And when you use this as guest, you now have other options available. So for example, for update booking, I want to provide a booking, and I want to provide a booking ID. And let's see how it goes. And of course, this looks more readable, right? Of course, once I change the name refactored, this will read like booking API uses guest update booking with booking and booking ID. So it will appear to be a pretty highly readable method. So let's see if it works fine, because if it does, then we'll also try to use it in the earlier method. So it looks okay. And if I now go ahead and use the same thing over here, so, and instead of guest, this time I want to use it as admin. So if I run the test again, it worked completely fine. So actually what we can do is we can get rid of this booking API class, and we can use booking API refactored method instead. So let me first copy paste everywhere. So in partial booking, use it as, let's call it as batch booking, right? And then I can remove this. What else? Update booking, this is correct. Control C, batch booking, update booking, this is also correct. Get booking, so let's change this. Get booking, and we only get a booking using booking ID. What else? Delete booking, let's change this as well. Delete booking, we only need to provide the booking ID, and not as guest, we want to do it as admin. So delete should be with admin, get can be with guest, update should be admin, partial update should be admin, guest user is guest, right? Let's go up. Yeah, for new booking, let's change this as well. Control C, use as admin, and we'll say new booking, and this would be booking, right? So let's run the whole class and see if it works fine or not. Okay, so we see one error, and that error is in partially update booking, and that is because of course this test was a failing test, right? So it is expected that it will have some errors. So everything seems to be working correct. So now I can just go ahead and delete this booking API class. So refactor, save delete. Okay, no one was using it, so it's now gone. Let's go ahead and create a branch. So I will say git branch, get checkout branch, and we will say make APIs, um, make APIs scope aware. And now if I go to changed files, let's update the file names. Yeah, so the package name is changed. So auth body, yeah, the package name is changed. Base spec, yeah, the package name is changed. Booking API is deleted. Booking tests, yep, we are changing them. Okay, unversioned files. So these are like 3 new files: scope factory, and booking API refactored. So yes, commit all of them, and we will say make APIs scope aware, commit them, and committing. If we get any formatting issues, then I'll fix them. Yeah, zero commit failed with error. So if I open Windows 3, we have some formatting things, and if I now add them, and let's say fixed code formatting, commit, Windows 1, Windows 2, and now all the files are committed. Let me close all these tabs. Now one more thing that I want to do is, in the test, I want to basically segregate the test as per 2 different classes. So in the guest user, I want to have all guest tests, and then I want to have another class which would be for admin users. So let's create a nested class here. Booking test, extends test setup, and I'm going to have a nested class, and I'll call it as class admin user. And inside this admin user, I will move all this tests, which is for get user, update user, partially update user. So Control X, and move all of these tests inside the admin user. And what this is doing is, now we have 2 classes. One is for guest user and another one is for admin user. And let's come here, and the before each and after each methods are common for both of them, right? Let's see. And at this moment, I'm not adding many tests. I think this serves the purpose of showing that, it can be done, that we can also have enough negative tests for different user roles. So let me just go ahead and run this class one more time, just to see that if everything is working fine or not. So we have guest user, admin user. We have an expected failure for partially update booking, and everything else seems to be working correct. Now let's also go and change this API class name from refactor rename and call it as booking API refactor, and let's have a final look at now how our test will be reading. So it says booking API uses admin, update booking, booking API uses guest, get booking, and booking API uses admin, delete booking. So this is much more readable compared to what we had in the past. And now our APIs are also scope agnostic, and you can use different scopes to test for different kind of situations. So I think with this we have covered pretty much everything that you wanted to cover in this particular topic. So let me quickly have a look. Talk about scopes. We defined scopes. We used scopes for APIs, and we created a spec factory to give specification for a requested scope. Create test per roles to test same API endpoint for different scopes. So with this, we have covered all these 5 different points, and all that is remaining is to basically create a PR for this and merge this. So let's say if I convert this milestone into an issue in REST Pro, number 27, and this is basically redesign test. So let's create a PR, Windows 2, booking API. Yeah, this is now renamed booking test. I now put all my tests inside nested classes, and let's call them as renamed API class. Commit. And if there are any commit failures, I will do it from VS Code. Let's see. Commit failure, Windows 3, factor classes. And let's go back, Windows 2. And now everything is committed, and the only thing that is remaining is to basically push this code. Push, Control C, Control V. Let's create a PR and create pull request. In fact, edit, and I want to say it fixes issue number 27, make API methods scope aware. And if I update the comment, what I can do is I can click on enable auto merge. It will not automatically merge until the build checks are completed. So the code is well formatted, and once the tests are running fine, then it will automatically merge. And the moment this PR merges, it will also automatically convert the status to done. So it is merged, and if I now refresh, point number 25 is now marked as done. Cool. So that's it for this video, and in the next video I will see how we can have singleton instances of auth tokens for our application. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye.